She was more than beautiful, she was myth. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed goddess who lived louder, loved harder, and broke every rule Hollywood ever made. But behind the diamonds and the headlines was a woman constantly rebuilding herself from the ruins of her own life. 8 marriages, 2 Oscars, countless scandals, and one heart that refused to stop beating no matter how many times it was broken. They called her the last great movie star. But in truth, she was something else, the woman who refused to die quietly. As a child, she was molded into perfection by MGM. As a woman, she was punished for refusing to stay perfect. She drank too much. She loved too deeply. She lived too loudly. And every time the world tried to bury her under scandal, she came back brighter and more dangerous. Her life was a carousel of husbands, headlines, and heartbreaks. But through all of it, the addictions, the affairs, the betrayals, one thing never changed. Elizabeth Taylor always told the truth, even when it destroyed her. She loved like a storm and survived like a queen. And maybe that's why her story still burns long after the cameras stopped rolling. Because Elizabeth Taylor didn't just live one life. She lived 9, each more outrageous, more painful, and more unforgettable than the last. Before she became the most photographed woman in the world, Elizabeth Taylor was just a little girl with eyes too strange to ignore violet, luminous, almost unreal. She was born in London in 1932 to American parents, and even as a child, she looked like destiny had chosen her. When the war began, her family fled to California, and there, Hollywood found her. MGM saw not a child, but a product, a porcelain doll they could mold into the perfect star. At 9, she was already under contract. By 12, she was a sensation. Her breakout film, National Velvet 1944, turned her into America's sweetheart overnight. But while the world adored her, Elizabeth's childhood ended before it began. Studio executives decided how she ate, dressed, spoke, even how she laughed. She was given horse tranquilizers to calm her nerves and diet pills to stay thin. At 14, she wore lipstick and high heels for publicity photos. At 16, she was treated like a woman desired, marketed, and controlled. Hollywood had built her into its most precious jewel, but that beauty came at a brutal cost. She once said, "I've been famous all my life, I just didn't know why." By 19, she was already married, the first of 8 weddings that would make her both iconic and infamous. The studios marketed her image as the perfect wife, perfect mother, and perfect woman. But Elizabeth wasn't interested in perfection. She wanted passion, chaos, life, and she would spend the rest of her years chasing it, no matter the cost. With every role a place in the sun, giant, cat on a hot tin roof, she grew from ingenue to goddess. Her beauty was undeniable, but what truly set her apart was the fire behind it. She wasn't playing the woman men wanted. She was playing the woman they feared. Yet beneath the glamour, there was always the wounded girl. MGM created longing for love, terrified of being alone, and trapped in a world that never stopped watching. By the time she turned 30, she had everything: fame, money, and the eyes of the world. But love was another story. Because every time Elizabeth Taylor fell in love, the world caught fire. By the late 1950 seconds, Elizabeth Taylor was no longer just a star, she was the star. But the higher she climbed, the more dangerous the fall became. Her third husband, Mike Todd, was the only man who truly seemed to understand her. He was bold, larger than life, and treated her not like a goddess, but like a woman. Together, they were unstoppable, the golden couple of Hollywood's golden age. But in 1958, tragedy struck. Todd's private plane crashed in New Mexico. Elizabeth was widowed at 26. The world mourned with her. For a brief moment, she was untouchable, the grieving widow, the queen of sorrow. But grief, for Elizabeth, was never quiet. And the heart that broke so easily was also the one that refused to stay still. Enter Eddie Fisher, Mike Todd's best friend and, inconveniently, a married man. Their affair became one of the biggest scandals of the 20th century. Tabloids called her a homewrecker, churches denounced her, and America, the same country that once adored her, turned on her overnight. But Elizabeth didn't flinch. When asked if she felt guilty, she famously replied, "You can't help who you fall in love with." It was reckless. It was unapologetic. It was pure Elizabeth Taylor. And then came Richard Burton, the man who would define her, destroy her, and love her like no one else could. They met on the set of Cleopatra 1963, the most expensive film ever made at the time, a production so cursed it nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. But the real fire wasn't on screen. It was between them. Married to other people, drunk on attraction, they fell into an affair so volcanic that even the Vatican condemned it as erotic vagrancy. Elizabeth didn't care. Neither did Burton. They loved like addicts, consumed by lust and laughter and rage. They married in 1964, divorced 10 years later, and remarried the following year, only to divorce again. But even when they were apart, their names could never be separated. "We were like magnets," Burton said. "If we stayed away, we'd die. If we were together, we'd kill each other." Together, they embodied everything Hollywood feared and desired: passion, chaos, excess, and truth. They fought publicly, drank too much, spent millions on jewels, and lived under a microscope. But no matter how wild their lives became, the love between them was frighteningly real. When they acted together, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, The Taming of the Shrew, it was no longer performance. It was therapy. It was war. It was art bleeding into life. By the end of the 1,970 seconds, Elizabeth had lived 10 lifetimes worth of heartbreaks. She was exhausted, addicted to alcohol and painkillers, and buried beneath the weight of her legend. The tabloids called her washed up. But as the world was about to learn, Elizabeth Taylor was far from finished. Because just when everyone thought she was gone, she came back, again. By the late 1,970 seconds, Elizabeth Taylor had lived more than anyone should. The girl with the violet eyes had become a woman haunted by her own legend. The marriages were over. The parties had grown quieter. And beneath the diamonds and laughter, something darker was taking hold. She drank to forget the silence. She took pills to escape the mirrors. The tabloids called her bloated, unstable, past her prime. But what they didn't see was a woman trying to outrun the pain of being Elizabeth Taylor, a name too heavy for any one person to carry. The cameras caught her falling. The public devoured every scandal. And yet, even at her lowest, there was something unbreakable about her. In 1983, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center, the first major celebrity ever to publicly enter rehab. It was unheard of at the time. Stars were supposed to hide their shame, not confess it. But Elizabeth never hid. She turned her breakdown into defiance, her flaws into humanity. When she walked out, the world saw something new. Not the goddess, but the survivor. And then she transformed again. In the 1,980 seconds, when the world turned its back on victims of AIDS, Elizabeth Taylor stepped forward. She lost close friends Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift's ghost still lingering in memory, and refused to stay silent. She founded the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR, spoke at funerals, held dying hands, and used her fame not for attention, but for compassion. "It's bad enough that people are dying of AIDS," she said, "but no one should die of ignorance." For the first time, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't the story. She was the voice. The woman once shamed by the world became its conscience. Her life slowed, but her legend didn't. She battled heart failure, scoliosis, and brain tumors, but she never lost her humor. She joked that she'd had more lives than a cat, and she wasn't wrong. Every time the world thought she was finished, she rose again stronger, wiser, funnier. Her 8th and final marriage ended in 1996, and she never remarried. She said she was finally done chasing love, because maybe, after everything, she'd found the only kind that lasts love for life itself. When she died in 2011, surrounded by her children and friends, the world didn't mourn just a movie star. They mourned the end of an era, the last true queen of Hollywood. She had lived loudly, loved recklessly, and forgiven completely, and that's how she became eternal. From this channel's point of view, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a movie star, she was Hollywood itself. Every light, every shadow, every contradiction the industry ever produced existed inside her. Beauty and chaos, luxury and loneliness, scandal and survival. She was the woman who lived through everything fame could possibly do to a person, and somehow came out stronger. In an era when women were told to be silent, obedient, and respectable, Elizabeth Taylor roared. She loved who she wanted, married whom she pleased, divorced when she was done, and never apologized for it. She broke rules not to rebel, but because the rules were too small for her life. People called her a sinner. They forgot she was also a savior to friends, to lovers, to a generation dying of AIDS when the world turned away. She didn't need to be perfect. She needed to be real. And that's what makes her story timeless. She taught the world that women could be flawed, messy, and powerful all at once. That vulnerability wasn't weakness. That love wasn't shame. That starting over wasn't failure. Through every scandal, she reminded us that survival itself is an art form. She once said, "I've been through it all, baby. I'm Mother Courage." And she meant it. Elizabeth Taylor's life was not one continuous fairy tale. It was 9 different lives stitched together with diamonds, tears, and resilience. Each version of her, the child star, the femme fatale, the grieving widow, the activist, carried the scars of the one before. And instead of hiding them, she made them shine. Her greatest role wasn't Cleopatra or Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It was herself, a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's script. To this day, Hollywood still tries to recreate her magic, the glamour, the fire, the mystery, but it never will. Because Elizabeth Taylor wasn't acting, she was living. And when you live that hard, you don't just leave a career behind. You leave a legend. In the end, Elizabeth Taylor didn't fade, she simply became light. There she was, the last true queen of Hollywood, sitting in her wheelchair surrounded by lavender silk, diamonds glinting softly on her hands. Her eyes, still violet, still unbroken, held the reflection of everything she'd lived through. Fame, heartbreak, addiction, loss. But also laughter, resilience, and love, endless, reckless love. Few people understood her, and maybe that's what made her eternal. She lived a life so outrageous that even death seemed too ordinary for her. She didn't die quietly. She concluded like the final scene of a film too magnificent to end any other way. She had once said, "You can't cry over every little thing. You just have to move on." And that's what she did again and again through 8 marriages, 1,000 headlines, and 1,000,000 reinventions. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't a saint or a sinner. She was a survivor, the living embodiment of contradiction. A woman who could wear a crown and still curse like a sailor. Who could fall apart and still command a room. Who could be broken and still be beautiful. Even now, when her films play on late-night television, she feels alive. That laugh, that defiance, that gaze that seemed to see right through the camera and right into you. She was never acting. She was confessing. Hollywood has changed. Its stars burn faster, fade quicker. But none of them burn like Elizabeth Taylor did. Because she didn't chase immortality. She earned it one heartbreak, one scandal, one resurrection at a time. She lived 9 lives. And somehow, she made every one of them worth watching. Some stories end when the lights go out. Hers began there. Some stories fade. Some stories are never meant to be known. But now, you know.